Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Beer and Money. My name is Ryan Burklo, and on today's episode, I've got a very special guest by the name of Rob Bukacek. He and I have worked together now for a couple years, and the reason I thought about having him on today's episode is he is an expert in working with the estate planning side of the finances. And before I introduce him here, this is where the mandatory disclosure tends to come out. Rob and I are not attorneys. We are not going to drum up the documents. We're not CPAs. We're not going to file your taxes. What we both do, however, is make sure that your estate planning documents, the taxes, and your finances all jive together. That's how we incorporate and work with our clients from that holistic planning piece. Rob is more of the expert on the estate planning side of stuff. So as we're trying to help our clients and help people be better with their finances, estate planning is often overlooked. So with that huge introduction, Mr. Bukacek, welcome to the show.
Enormous. Thanks for having me, Ryan.
So, you and I were chatting before hopping on here, and you asked, how does the podcast go? How does this episode go? And I mentioned to you that would like for you to share why the estate planning side of the industry became really a side that you focused in. So I'd love to hear your story as to how you went into that.
Well, it was kind of interesting. Some of it was personal experience. Some of it was work. On the personal side, I ended up probating 2 estates, one for my brother when he passed away at 32, and then one for my dad when he passed away at 63. Both of them had no plans in place whatsoever because neither one of them expected to die at the age that they died, right?
Sure. Yeah.
They thought had plenty of time to get it together. So I quickly found out that probate is a total pain to go through. And my dad was in Florida, my brother was in California. Neither one was easy. When I became a financial advisor back in 2002, it was probably 8-9 years before I met a gal, Eileen Rice, who is my mentor. Eileen is an expert at estate planning. She's forgotten more about estate planning than I know. She's amazing. But she gave a presentation 1 year at our firm and gave this concept of helping people set up a strategy using estate planning and on how to save on taxes and how to protect their heirs. And I was immediately intrigued. I grabbed her after that seminar and I said, I want to know everything you know.
Mm.
And so that started in 2010, 2011. And we've had a steady group going on a monthly basis ever since.
Yeah, there's always, normally at least, with a lot of advisors which go into either the industry in general or more specifically like a niche like you have with the estate planning. There's always a personal story that always kind of pushes that. And so you've got with your brother and your dad.
Yeah, one was a carrot, one was a stick, right?
Right, exactly. I was thrust into that same type of thing when my brother passed away in 2019 at the age of 32. And so that's when I started to get more serious about the estate planning side of stuff. So it's sad that we have to learn the hard way almost to, what that is. And I think that's a lot of people in life, unfortunately, as well.
I think a lot of people do. They either go through it themselves with their own family, or they have a friend or somebody else who goes through an ugly estate settlement and figure out that, hey, I need to get my act together and I need to do some things. And unfortunately, I mean, that's good that they're getting motivated to take action, but a lot of times they just go in kind of unknowingly, like, okay, now what? What do I do? They listen to somebody say, oh, you need a trust, you need a will, and they go, okay, and they search online, they Google it, and then try to figure it out themselves, maybe save themselves a few bucks.
Which is so funny you mentioned that. Like, I have attorneys that I work with that say, oh, I'll just do my own stuff. And then long story short, I bring up a bunch of stuff that they haven't even thought about. I'm not even the attorney and I know certain things to bring up. And then they say, oh, maybe I should work with an attorney, right? So it's like what you don't know type of thing. And kind of backing out here a little bit, you've already said some words that I would argue that a lot of people don't like. They've heard of the word, or they don't really know what it is. Like you mentioned probate, right? You mentioned
Mhm.
different things of what I think a lot of people have heard of, but they don't know what it is. And when it comes to estate planning, I think there is this just complete misunderstanding. Estate planning to some people might be you have to be a billionaire to have an estate plan, because they think of an estate as like, the estate sale, right? Like,
Sure.
let me sell my $100 million artwork collection. Like they've got that definition in their head, or they've got the other definition of is it's not needed because that type of stuff won't happen to me type of scenario, right? So everything in between. So let's back up. Let's kind of go over the basics of estate planning if we can. So let's start with probate. Since we brought up, I think it's a great place to start, because if you don't, the fact of the matter is if you don't have documents in place, you're leaving it up to the state to dictate what occurs. And
Sure.
then because you're leaving it up to the state to what occurs, probate occurs. So let's go into that.
Yeah. So each state has their own laws, um, laws of intestacy, that dictate if somebody dies without any written documentation saying what they want to happen to their stuff, be it a will or a trust, then the state has a plan in place for them, and it basically dictates how their assets, their estate, is going to be distributed, and who to, and when. And a lot of times that comes at a cost because the state wants to get compensated for it. Estates will often have attorneys assigned to the court that go ahead and monitor this process. So the attorney's getting paid to sell your estate if you didn't create a will or a trust. And that money comes out of your estate. It doesn't come from the court. It doesn't come from the county. It doesn't come from the state. It comes from your state. So it can be expensive. And then the other thing too is that probate, that process, is a public process. So when somebody dies without a will or trust, it's public information, and all that information gets disclosed. So what happens is you often end up, and this happened to me personally, you have vultures coming in and trying to take advantage of people who don't know any better. When my dad passed away in Florida, I got a letter in the mail for a $26,000 bill. My dad didn't have even a $26,000 estate. My dad did not have a lot of money, and when he passed away, thank goodness, he was very organized and had all his stuff in a file cabinet. And I figured if there was a bill for this,
It would be there, right?
it was going to be there.
Right.
Yeah. And so I did a little research. Turned out, yeah, it was a scam. They were just trying to submit a bill for the estate. So you don't want your information public. And so one way to avoid that, and I'll say, most people say, well, I'll get a will done, because that's usually the least expensive option of doing an estate plan. And a will gives you the ability to direct who's going to manage the distribution of your estate. You choose an executor, and it also gives you the ability to say who's going to inherit your stuff. And you could say, I'm going to give it to my children. You could say, I'm going to leave it to charity. Or if you don't have either of those that you want to leave it to, you can just say extended family, and then the laws of intestacy actually step in and distribute those assets. The problem with just having a will is that you still go through probate. It's still public. It's still expensive. Okay. And some states are much better than others. I'm in California. So California, I will say, is really bad because there's a lot of people here. And there's a lot of people that pass away, and there's not a lot of resources for the courts to handle the amount of cases that they have to handle. So the probate for just recently for my wife's father, who didn't have an estate, and all he had was a house. He was a widower, had a house, 2 cars, and some money in an IRA, and a little bit of money in the bank. And it took 2.5 years to settle that estate. So it takes a long time.
So you've lost a loved one, right? Like you put yourself in, right? I'm putting myself in the shoes of your significant other there, and she's lost her father, and she's battling a court system for 2.5 years. So constantly reliving it, like all of that stuff, like that would,
Just
be
dragging
miserable.
out that experience, right?
Right. Exactly.
Of losing her father. Yeah. You,
So,
you just don't want to deal with it.
right.
Fortunately, and there was a distant relative, uh, his sister, who suddenly wanted to see what she could get out of it. And she wasn't an heir.
Right.
My wife had her brother. They were the only two heirs, and that was that. But the sister, she wanted to stick her nose in and just created all kinds of havoc. So beyond a will, you can get a living trust, a revocable living trust. And a living trust is more of a document that um, allows you to keep things private. It's handled personally. It's not handled through the courts, the settlement of an estate. The great thing about a trust versus a will is a will only comes into play once you've passed away, right? A revocable living trust has some additional benefits where you may still be alive, but you have lost capacity. You're in an accident, you're in a coma, you have dementia, things like that. And now, instead of people going to court to help you manage your finances and get the court to allow that and then have to report to the court, you can dictate in your living trust those people to handle those things on your behalf.
And I'll just pause you there for a second, because that's something that my family and I had to do when my brother was passed away in 2019. He had cancer, and he essentially at some point stopped being able to make decisions. And he still had this thing called a car loan. He still had these things called credit card bills and utility bill that at a place that he hasn't lived at for like 6 months, essentially, up until that point. So he had all these bills that he was really somewhat managing up until he couldn't.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't tell you the difficulty around trying to get power of attorney to be able to step in to help him in that was just horrible. And
Yeah,
this is, by the way, he's a United States Air Force. He was stationed in San Francisco. And so between that and my parents being in Texas, like it was not fun. I'd put it that way.
sure.
And so it's something Alex and I have spoken about this on several other episodes around estate planning. Like, just because you're not married or you don't have kids doesn't mean you shouldn't have an estate plan in place, because like, take what my parents had to go through
Mm-hmm.
for their son.
Yeah, yeah, for
Right.
sure.
So sorry to interrupt you there. I just wanted to make
No,
sure
that's
that
okay. Yeah,
point
you actually
lands.
brought up an important point too. Kids, right? Um, if something happens to the parents of a minor child, who's going to take care of that minor child?
Yeah.
And the way the laws are written, anybody can step up. Anybody can go to court and petition to take care of that child, right? So a will allow you to designate a guardian for your minor children. So that's very important. You don't want to leave that up to the courts. And granted, a will doesn't demand that the person that you choose be a guardian for that child, but it is a recommendation to the court, and the court's going to look at what is best for the child, right? So if you've nominated somebody that has since gone bankrupt, is drinking themselves into a
Right.
stupor or something like that, just because you name them guardian in your will doesn't mean the court's going to go, okay, yeah, turn the kids over. Should be good. No, they're gonna look at it, but that's important, and that needs to happen right away after somebody's passed away.
Yeah, for sure. So we've spoken about probate, we've spoken about wills, we've spoken about trusts. Like, what else are we missing for like just kind of the basics of estate planning here?
Well, so one of the reasons I got intrigued about estate planning was Eileen, my mentor, spoke about strategy,
Hmm.
right, and how to use estate planning strategically. And I think that's true for a lot of things that we do in our business, with regards to investments, with regards to insurance, with regards to estate planning, all those things. It's about being strategic with your decisions and looking at how does one decision affect the rest of my assets, the rest of my life, right? And so with estate planning, you have the ability to strategically protect your heirs in the event of your death. So you can set up restrictions, motivate them. In order for them to get some of their inheritance, they have to get a degree in college. They have to meet with a financial advisor. If you have a child, and I had one myself, who has an addiction problem, they might have to do a drug test in order to continue to receive benefits from their trust. So not only in doing that, you also can protect your children from divorce. So you can stipulate that your assets go into trust and they're held in trust. And if your child picks the wrong person in life and later gets divorced, then those assets are not going to be subject to that divorce. They're going to be protected.
I'm so glad you brought this up, right? Like there are two examples that I think many people, at least that we speak to, like really care about. And one of the common questions I always ask when I'm looking at someone's estate plan documents, like a lot of these estate plans, essentially when their kid turns 18, they get access to all the funds.
Mm-hmm.
So do you want to, like in the instance where your kid, like let's just use simplistic numbers, let's just say it's $1 million that they're getting. Do you want an 18-year-old to be able to have access to the full $1 million?
Yeah.
Because I don't know about you, Rob, when I was 18, that $1 million, like Ferrari's coming my way, right?
Oh, heck yeah.
Like I'm, maybe I'm moving to Hawaii and buying, right? Like who knows what I would have done. And so like there's that. And then you also brought up around like, where they can like how to earn the money, right? And then the divorce aspect, right? So like I've got a daughter, I've got a son as well, but the fact of the matter is if I pass away and my wife passes away and we've got this money set aside for them, I don't want that money to go to my kid's ex-husband.
For sure. Or just force them to have the conversation. I mean, you might have a significant estate, right? And knowing that you're going to inherit that estate, if your son or daughter has to go have a conversation before they get married about, hey, by the way, my parents did well in life, and if I inherit anything, I need you to sign this agreement.
Yep.
Right? Because that always goes well.
Well, and you bring up another point, right? Like I think so many, I ask my clients this all the time. Hey, do your parents have an estate plan? And many, it's like 50-50 yes or no.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like yes or no, like whether or not they know of one or not. And then the next question I follow up with is, do you actually know what the estate plan is?
Right.
Which then it kind of gets awkward. And I get it too, because, from your parents' point of view, right, they don't want you to worry about them. That's the last thing that they want. And then from the kids' point of view, you don't want it to sound like you're like after their money. It's just more of being aware of what the plan is. That will stop any kind of battles from or at least hope mitigate battles from family members trying to get what they think they deserve or something like that, as well as in the instance of, having a daughter and, the ex-husband, like I just brought up, she's going to be aware of where that came from, caring from her. And whereas if I don't have that conversation with her, who knows how she takes that and says, oh, my parents must have not liked me very much because I can't share this with my family. Like, maybe she takes it a different way. That's not the intention.
For sure. Yeah. Or keep it in the bloodline.
Right.
Right. That's another thing is, even if you do have those assets and they aren't subject to a divorce, could that person remarry? Could your own spouse remarry somebody else? I can't tell you how many times I've heard from clients, oh yeah, my dad and my stepmom, my dad passed away, my stepmom got all the money, and then when she passed away, we got hosed and my stepbrother and sister got everything.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Even though it was, maybe dad's wealth or combined wealth. Who knows? Right? But, being able to put those things into a revocable living trust to help protect. And this is where a lot of people make mistakes is they don't put that language in there to help protect for those possibilities. And nobody knows. I hear so often, oh, or siblings fighting over money, right? Or control. Oh, my kids are great. They get along.
They're not going to fight.
They're not going to fight. No, my family, everybody's kosher. Everybody gets along great. There's not going to be any arguments. Oh my gosh. You have no idea how people get when money comes into play.
And it may not even be the money per se. Like it might be how one kid took the plan to mean and how another kid took the plan to mean. And they're actually trying to care for one another and their family. They're both actually have the same true like care, but took it two different ways. And because of that, they're both fighting, and they're fighting hard because they're trying to protect their parents' legacy or whatever they've internalized. I just think that's often overlooked, especially when the kids don't know the plan to begin with.
Yeah. So that conversation is important. That's a really good point. I did have a client who had an estate plan. I shouldn't say client. I tried to make them a client. Approached them. They said they had a trust. They have all their finances together. Dad's really smart with money. We're good. They owned a couple of businesses. Not big businesses. One was a tire store. The other one was a performance shop. And they actually shared a parking lot. And one brother ran the tire shop. The other brother ran the performance shop. And Dad just kind of oversaw everything. Dad got cancer. We said, hey, let's take a look at your estate plan, make sure everything's buttoned up. He said, no, we're fine. Dad passes away. And now the brothers have a difference of opinion as to who should get what after Dad's passed away. And Mom had a different opinion as well. Mom's like, screw those kids. This is mine still. They're not getting anything. Well, the brothers got in a fist fight in the parking lot the day of Dad's funeral. Right?
Wow.
Nobody talks to anybody. Mom moved off. She moved out of state. The brothers still live in the same area with each other and flip each other off on the way to work on a daily basis. Everybody lawyered up. Everybody sued everybody. And in the end, the only people that got money out of it were the lawyers.
Right. That's the whole purpose of this estate plan, is to make sure that the people you want inheriting whatever you've got get the highest amount that you want them to get, so net of taxes, and it transfers the easiest way possible with mitigating any of all of that stuff that you just mentioned. Like that's the whole purpose of estate planning.
Well, providing clarity in that plan.
Right.
And then having those conversations with your family to say, hey, this is what I'm doing and this is why I've done it, so that everybody understands and everybody's on the same page, so everybody doesn't wind up in court suing each other or hating each other at the very least. So, yeah, that's a mistake I see a lot of people make.
Yeah. So you started going, one of the questions I had for you, and so you've already mentioned one mistake. So I wanted you to go over kind of like, what are the top 3 mistakes you're seeing when you sit down with people around their estate plan? So you just mentioned one mistake. What are some other mistakes that you see out there?
So I'll say top 3 mistakes. The first mistake is people try to do the plan by themselves.
Sure.
They go online, and there's some decent online companies that you can get a very basic plan. And when I say very basic, it's somebody who has a house, they're in a lifelong marriage, and maybe they don't own a business or something like that. Very simple. Everybody's got the same kids. As soon as you start getting into blended families or having multiple businesses or property in multiple states, online trusts are not the way to go. I would say having
I'm going to interrupt you real quick there on the online trust. Even from a strategy standpoint, right? Because the online trusts don't understand the strategies of actually transferring the assets when we take into consideration taxation, right? When we look at, a family that has X amount of dollars in a traditional IRA, X amount of dollars in a Roth IRA, X amount of dollars in like a brokerage investment account, right? So just from that standpoint, have they thought of any kind of strategic plan to transition those assets to their loved ones in the most efficient manner? Like that's another piece that the estate plan, that the online plans don't generally talk into.
Sure. Well, we don't know what we don't know. right?
Right.
So if you try to go do it yourself, you get it online. First of all, those things are very boilerplate. They don't provide any flexibility. They don't take any consideration somebody's individual circumstances,
Yep.
or what they might need or might want. So it's very, fill in the blank, answer the questions as you go through, and then it just pops out a document. And you're supposed to understand what that document means. It has a lot of legal terminology in it. So you might be able to, you're probably a smart individual that can get through a document and kind of figure things out. But again, you don't know what you don't know. You don't know what other options might be out there. So having an attorney is very helpful, but I will say not all attorneys completely understand estate planning.
Yeah.
Just about any attorney can do an estate plan. That doesn't mean just about any attorney should, right? They all take the course to pass the bar in estate planning. Some of them pay for the software because, every once in a while they get a gig to do somebody's estate plan. And that too is kind of boilerplate and fill in the blank. And they don't keep up on the rules and the laws. And most of them don't fully understand estate plan taxation. Okay. So getting with an attorney that practices estate planning, that has expertise in estate planning, and even better, if you're of a higher net worth, you're in that 5 to 10 million or above range, then talking to an estate planning attorney that has specialization in estate tax law is definitely something somebody should do.
And definitely will work with, and that estate planning attorney will work with your financial professional to line things up.
Yeah. So, with me and my clients, most of my clients come to me, they either have an estate plan or they don't have one. And if they do have an estate plan, one of the first things I'm doing is taking them to an attorney to get an estate plan done. But before I do that, I spend about 90 minutes with my clients explaining to them how they can set this up, how they can do this. And then actually walk them into the attorney's office, or we do a Zoom call because, it's 2024.
Yep.
And we get on a Zoom call with the attorney and we sit there in the meeting and the attorney starts asking their questions and everything like that. And attorneys generally don't take the time to explain all the different options that a person can do. They just kind of go through the questionnaire, fill in the blanks, and then decide for them, maybe with a few questions. Like, do you want your kids to get all their stuff at 18, or, would you prefer them to get maybe a third at 25, a third at 30, and a third at 35? Right? As if those are the only two options.
Right.
And they're not. So,
and on some level, like, we're beating up on estate planning attorneys. On some level, if they said, well, that's unlimited options, like, that meeting would never end.
True.
Right. So you have to get the client to take action. But on another level, and this is why it's key to have someone like maybe us in that meeting is ideally a good financial planner or financial advisor is going to understand the client's goals and wishes and has all of that kind of really kind of solidified with the client, which then, and because of our knowledge around estate planning, we can actually help guide this and where this goes. So we can actually say, actually, there's a fourth option. This is what we were looking at, or, whatever that looks like.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And so I guess having us in that meeting helps to produce that conversation, right?
Yep.
Instead of, do you want this or that? And then being able to chime in and say, or you could do this. And then a discussion erupts, right? And then everybody kind of talks and gives their input and they come to a conclusion. But it's a well-educated, well-discussed conclusion. It's not just a fill in the blank. And you're right. I don't want to beat up estate attorneys. They do an excellent job. Their knowledge is phenomenal. And we will go back and forth on topics. And sometimes the attorneys win and sometimes I win.
Well, this is where the different areas of expertise should come together in an alignment for the client.
For sure.
Right. So there's just certain areas where, we actually get to really fully experience the client when they do have someone passed away and all of the financial repercussions from that. Whereas the attorneys, I'm not sure I'm speaking out of line, possibly. I'm not sure they experience it in the same way that we do.
Oh, great point. So I've worked with a couple of attorneys that do, as part of their practice, they do probate settlement. So they're in the courts and they're doing the probate, or they get hired by the courts to represent an estate where there's an argument between the beneficiary and the trustee who's handling the estate, and so that's all they see. Whereas we're out there and we hear the stories of the family that says, yeah, mom, dad, mom, stepmom got all the money and we got hosed. That's what we see. So we tend to err on that side. We all have our biases.
Yep.
There's no doubt.
Yep.
And I try as hard as possible to keep the bias out, but it happens. It happens with attorneys. It happens with financial advisors.
Absolutely. So did we get to a third mistake?
Third mistake. Yeah. The third mistake is the biggest one.
Let's not skip this then.
People get a trust and they think they're done, and they're not done. They have to
They didn't late. Yeah. Say it again. I interrupted you. Say that again.
You have to retitle your assets. You have to go to your banks and tell them you got a trust now and you need to change the name of the account to the trust. You have to retitle your real estate, your property. Vehicles, not so much. Depends on the state, but most DMVs just take a death certificate and they'll give the car to whoever. But yeah, a lot of people, I had a client, $50 million net worth with a $25,000 estate plan that he paid for. And most estate plans don't cost that much, right? Not even near that much. But this was a beautifully written estate plan. And I looked at everything and nothing he owned was titled to that trust. So $50 million. And he had a beautiful $25,000 document that did absolutely nothing.
Which is sad, right? Because let's just call it what it is. Going through that process to get that estate plan document in place isn't the funnest and easiest thing to do.
No, not at
Yet
all.
it means nothing unless you do the second part, which is also not very fun and easy to do. And that is making sure that all the assets are retitled.
Yeah. Yeah. It would be like creating a business and a business that owned nothing. Like,
Right. No, I've seen that ample times as well as the mistakes inside of the what should have been in the trust versus out of the trust, depending on what they wanted.
Yes, for sure.
So, well, Rob, I know we are at time here. I so appreciate having you joining us and going through this.
Oh, this is great. I love talking about this.
So we always end with the question of the day for our listeners. And so I've got two questions for our listeners today. So number one question is, and this probably won't shock any of our listeners, do you have an estate plan? Right? That's number one. And number two, if you do have an estate plan, when's the last time you looked at those documents and aligned them to make sure that they actually do what you want them to do?
And can I say number three?
Please.
Is it funded? Did you retitle your assets?
Yes.
Like, even if you did it first, did you go back and as you acquired new assets, title those assets to your trust?
Awesome. Rob, thanks again for being on the show. Listeners, again, check us out at beerandmoney.net. At the top of the page, you've got the Contact Us page. If you have any questions from this episode, that's a great way to email us with those questions. Or here's another idea. If you got any value out of this, my guess is you might know someone that also could use this conversation. So take the link, forward the link to whoever that person may be, either people at work, loved ones, because the whole purpose the whole reason we have this podcast is to help you look differently about your money so that you can live the life that you want to live. Appreciate it, Rob. And to everyone else, cheers.
Enjoyed it, Ryan.
This podcast is for informational purposes only and is not to be construed as tax, legal, or investment advice. Although the information has been gathered from sources believed to be reliable, please note that individual situations can vary. Therefore, the information should be relied upon only when coordinated with individual professional advice. Guest speakers and their firms are not affiliated with or endorsed by Park Avenue Securities, Guardian, or Quantified Financial Partners, and opinions stated are their own. Guardian, its subsidiaries, agents, and employees do not provide tax, legal, or accounting advice. Consult your tax, legal, or accounting professional regarding your individual situation. All investments and investment strategies contain risk and may lose value. This material is intended for general public use. By providing this content, Park Avenue Securities LLC is not undertaking to provide investment advice or a recommendation for any specific individual or situation, or to otherwise act in a fiduciary capacity. Please contact a financial representative for guidance and information that is specific to your individual situation. Ryan and Alex are registered representatives and financial advisors of Park Avenue Securities LLC, OSJ 200 Market Street, Suite 1850, Portland, Oregon 97201. Phone number 503-221-1226. Securities products and advisory services offered through Park Avenue Securities, member FINRA, SIPC. Financial representatives of the Guardian Life Insurance Company of America, Guardian, New York, New York. Park Avenue Securities is a wholly owned subsidiary of Guardian. Quantified Financial Partners is not an affiliate or subsidiary of Park Avenue Securities or Guardian. Ryan Burklo, CA Insurance License Number 0K24924. Alexander Collins, CA Insurance License Number 0H24806.
Number 7216238.1. Expiration date October 2026.